Hey folks, this is going to be a video called Stop Making 4X Games, and it's an appeal to 4X game developers in an effort to try to get them to think about making games in a smarter way. Okay, I'm going to break this down into multiple sections. Just as a quick disclaimer, I have got a large bullet pointed list of things I want to discuss, and I've organised it quite well, I think. However, because of the size of the topic and the fact that there are many intersecting issues, you may find that I do wander off topic every now and again. It's just the way that my brain works, but I invite you to try to understand that many of these interlocking issues might well be very important to think about in terms of this topic. Okay, so yeah, don't get too worried if I start talking about something that doesn't sound related, because it probably is. Okay, so here's my thesis. I've noticed a big problem in modern 4X games, and that is that we are getting a lot of games that are being designed that basically shoehorn in mechanics from games from the 1990s in a way that do not fit their overall games design in a big way. And I'm going to explain to you why I think this is happening. But the thesis is, so developers are ruining their games by attempting to squeeze new ideas into the 4X genre, but having to also shoehorn in 4X genre design tropes in an effort to make them more appealing to players. And players, and therefore developers, are starting to expect this bad structure, okay? And it's the addiction to this old 4X structure that was originally designed for mostly three very specific games from the 1990s, is really stunting 4X game development in a big way. Okay, so that's my thesis. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain to you why this is happening. I'm actually going to tell you what a 4X game is as well, for those of you who don't know much about 4X. Because those of you who might be watching this video, you might find some similarities in the way that the 4X game development community is working, that you'll see similarities with your own genre that you're interested in, because this is not limited to 4X. Although 4X issues are specific to that particular genre, you may well find that there are adjacent issues that kind of that work as well with whatever it is that you play. I'm then we're going to talk about why it is that developers want to make these games and the problems that they tend to run into and why. And then I'm going to propose to you one potential solution for sorting this out. Okay, this is BattleMode's proposed plan, because it's very easy, I think, for influencers and critics to talk about these problems, but then they don't often offer any attempt at a solution. I'm not going to promise that my solution is a good one. There's that old adage that gamers are really good at knowing when there's a problem. They're not so good at knowing what the problem is, and they're absolutely terrible at proposing solutions. Okay, and that applies at all times. However, I have thought about this a lot, and I invite you to listen to the proposed solutions, in at least to kind of try and get your head around, whether you're a developer or whether you're a gamer, to get your head around whether you think the issues that I'm trying to target are actually problematic or not. Okay, because if you can do that, and don't critique the proposed solution so much as just try to look at it and use it as a framework for maybe developing your own ideas on how we can approach this. And it may be that you don't think this is a problem at all, but here we go. So first of all, 4X, I've brought up Emperor of the Fading Suns. This is the reason why I'm going to be using this game just to look at, is partly because it's actually a very, very good 4X game. It's not perfect, but this game avoids a lot of the problems that modern 4X games have by design, and it's been designed to do so, I think. Even though it's an early title in the genre too. So we're going to be using this, and it's good to have something to look at as well. I was going to do a slideshow, but yeah, it's too much effort. Okay, so 4X games. Generally speaking, they are empire building games. You usually start off with a small amount of holdings, so like one planet if it's a space 4X game, or a city on a world where if it's a historical 4X or a fantasy 4X. Those are the three main genres, by the way: fantasy 4X, space 4X, and historical 4X. And yeah, you start out with a small amount of holdings. You explore the area around you. Then you find resources to exploit and use those to build an army. You've usually got other players, and the other players are doing the same thing, and so you you take as much territory as you can, you exploit the resources, you convert those into military units and other things, whatever your victory condition, you know, to support whatever victory condition you're going for, and then you get into conflict with your opponents, whether that's militarily or through, you know, other diplomatic methods, and then you try to win the game by overcoming them. Okay, so 4X games are a form of strategy game, but they are very much tied into this idea of resource acquisition, territory expansion, and often some diplomatic wranglings, including warfare, which will enable you to win the game. Okay, so that's the basic structure of a 4X game. Now there is much variation within this. So there was this idea in the 90s that came from a kind of gag that was made by a guy called Alan Emmerich, who was sort of part of the development team of the original Master of Orion game. He called them 4Xs. So we have explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. So, you know, you explore your territory around you, you expand out into it, then you exploit the resources you find, and then you use those to exterminate your enemies. Completely inadequate to describe the genre. Nobody should ever be using the 4Xs as a basis or any kind of structure for their game. I mean, I've in my own circles quite famously argued, and successfully I think, that Super Mario Kart is a 4X game if we're just sticking with the explore, expand, exploit, exterminate. You can bend these terms however you want, and you can get all sorts of garbage fitting into 4X, so we're just going to ignore those for now, but it's just kind of an interesting, you know, excursion into the history of it. So we have 3 very popular games that were made in the early 90s, 2 of them by the same company, and all 3 of them released by the same publisher. Okay, these are what I call the 3 pillars of 4X, or the big 3, which is Civilization, or Sid Meier's Civilization, Master of Orion by Simtex, and Master of Magic also by Simtex. And these are the 3 kind of founding games of their genres. Now, people will argue that there are other games that came before, or maybe afterwards, that were more influential and perhaps more indicative of their genre, but in my opinion, these are the big 3. And there's some argument as whether Master of Orion 2 is a better game or more influential. I don't think so, but it's certainly, it's certainly an argument to be had. Okay, so why is it developers want to make 4X games now? Well, often I think they're just fans of the genre. You speak to developers, and I speak to 4X developers all the time. You will often find that they are usually big 4X fans, and they just want to make more games. I think that's probably the most common answer to this question. They are just big 4X fans. They want to make better games. Now, if you are a fan of the genre, you will have likely played past games in the series, you know, in the genre. So you're likely to have played Civilization, or one of the Civilization games, Master of Orion, or one of the Master of Orion-like games in the Space 4X genre, or anything that's kind of remotely related to Master of Magic, which is pretty much every Fantasy 4X. There's very few that don't play like Master of Magic in some way. The other reason why developers want to make 4X games is because I think it's easier to stick to an established genre than it is to make something completely new. Now, as we'll see, Emperor of the Fading Suns here, this is very unusual in the sense that it is a 4X game, absolutely, but it doesn't play a whole lot like one. Like, it looks like one. It's got all the 4Xs, yeah? It's got, in fact, this is a big complex 4X game because you've got multiple planets. So it's kind of a space 4X mixed with a terrestrial, you know, almost like fantasy-like 4X. However, it's got so much more to it, and I think that when you're a 4X developer, making a game that's this big and expansive, that is designed in a way that it's designed self-contained outside of the genre, that is much more difficult to do than just sticking to an established genre and going, okay, we're just going to make a 4X game, so it's going to be a bit like Civ, and we're going to have you have settlers, and you make cities, and then there's a tech tree, and there's diplomacy. You know what I mean? So it's a lot easier, it's quicker and cheaper in terms of design time to just make a game that is part of the 4X genre, because you don't have to spend ages in design. The other reason why I think developers still want to make 4X games is that there is a large potential market for them. So this might run contrary to some of the points that I'm going to make later on. where I'm saying 4X games often fail. But there is a large potential market, okay? So games like Sid Meier's Civilization gets massive numbers of players. I mean, it's a bit of a joke in the 4X community, actually, that most people who play Civilization don't even know what the term 4X means, and most of them will only own Civ on PC. They probably have only got a Steam account, so they've got Civ, okay? Most people who play Civ do not generally play other games. So and it's an enormous market share. Then we've got games that are that are still very, very popular by 4X standards, that get big numbers and sold very, very well, but they are dramatically smaller market share than Civ. So I'm going to talk about the Age of Wonders series as one example, and games like Warhammer 40k Gladius Relics of War also has a relatively large player base, also a very good game. But the reality of things is that the sales of a 4X game and the real market that you've got is much smaller. But the key point here is potential, okay? The other thing is that making strategy games from scratch really requires a lot of talent and a lot of experience. And yeah, I've kind of touched on this before, but it's kind of easier and cheaper to stick to a predetermined formula. The problem is that the formula isn't really working anymore, as I'll go on to explain. There's another question that you might want to ponder, which is, are developers making 4X partly because 4X tends to surprise in it sort of mutates and surprises people with where it can go, okay? And this is a potential saving grace for developing games as 4X, because every now and again we get a weird one that comes up, like this one, or Shadow Empire, or Dominions, or, if you want to bend the genre a little bit, something like Conquest of Elysium, or Conquest of Eos, the Spellforce game. We get these weird games that come out that are kind of like 4X, and they bend the 4X genre in very, very interesting ways. And I think that trying to capture some of that fire might be why developers are still kind of like trying to push 4X in, trying to make 4X games in that particular rigid structure. And just quickly, we're going to talk about why players want to play 4X games. I think partly is often we're an older crowd now, and I think a lot of us want to recapture the fire of the older great games that we used to play, and there's certainly some nostalgia built in there. But we mustn't, write off the experiences and joys and loves of a whole genre, a whole fan base, just writing it off as nostalgia. That's kind of ignorant. There is certainly some nostalgia, I think, in older games, but that's not the reason why people play modern 4X games. The real reason, I think, in my opinion, is because the genre is truly great when it works. Okay, so when 4X works, when you do manage to capture the fire, and you catch the lightning in the bowl, then you can get some truly great games, and it's the reason why games like Civilization sell so well. Just quickly, what are some of the alternatives for 4X games? Well, grand strategy games like the Paradox stuff are very, very close, I'd say. War games are kind of close. And yeah, so I've got a theory, and this is a little bit of a tangent, so I won't talk about it too much, but I think that 4X was a bit of a weird mutation along an evolutionary line that started with sort of tabletop war games and computerized versions of tabletop war games in the 1980s. And was, developers trying, or games designers trying to make what we now know as grand strategy games, okay? I think that 4X was a branch, was one particular exploration in that path, and it was so successful with the big three, with Master of Orion, with Master of Magic and Civ. Those games were so good that actually it turned into its own genre in itself, and that's what 4X is now. It's a weird bastard mutation of the grand strategy game before grand strategy was really a big thing, because computing power couldn't do that much detail. So 4X still retains some of the board game like design that came from the older, from the period of the 80s and 90s, where people were trying to computerize board games, basically digital board games. This is important and relevant when we come to my potential solutions later. Alright, so what is the problem? What is this that you're banging on about battle mode? What is it you think is the issue? Okay, so the big issue here is that the 4X game structure, or the 4X design tropes, everything that goes into making a 4X game, is when it's taken out of context from those 3 original games, is kind of weak. Okay, there's a lot of problems with 4X games. There's a lot of problems, and some of them are quite well discussed. Some of them are big perceived problems that don't always turn out to be quite what people think they are, and often it is just, developers are trying to shoehorn in mechanics into their new games from the older games, thinking that that will somehow make them better, and it doesn't. And there are many forms of this kind of abuse, okay? But we're going to go into them. So, Master of Orion, I'm going to give you an example, by the way. So, for example, Master of Orion 2 is a classic game, it's really, really good. Nobody's denying that that's a great game, right? But Master of Orion kind of inherited Master of Magic's kind of bad civic building system. So you open it, so in Master of Magic, I won't open the game, but for example, Master of Magic, you'll open your city, and then it gives you a big list of buildings. Like, do you want to build a granary? Okay, you build a granary. Now I'm going to build a barracks. Now I'm going to build a barracks. It's like kind of Civ. They took it from Civ, but it kind of worked in Master of Magic, although it's got problems. The issue is that they then transplanted that system into Master of Orion 2, and it was not needed, and it just made the game worse. And it wasn't even nuanced. You just kind of had to build everything everywhere for the most part. So Master of Orion 2 was the first example of where it was the first big example of where this problem happened, where Simtex transplanted a mechanic out of an older game into a newer one and hoped that it would make the game better, but it actually just made it worse. Like Master of Orion 1, it's arguable as to whether that's a better game. I think it is, and I think a lot of critics think it is. But Master of Orion 2, it was just a sloppier game in certain respects because they removed the building slider system. Instead, they replaced it with this laborious kind of busy work. Okay, another example would be Gladius. This would be an example of how developers can sometimes remove mechanics to make them better. So, for example, Warhammer 40k Gladius Relics of War, by removing diplomacy, actually made the game better, because in that game, it's a lore-friendly thing that in Warhammer, the Space Marines and the Orcs can never be friends. They're not likely to work together. So there's no diplomacy in that game. Now, there's some ways where the Imperium would work together. So, for example, the Sisters of Battle would probably work with the Imperial Guard at times, but there's no reason why they can't be at war too. And so Gladius removing diplomacy actually made that a much better game, because the core focus of Gladius is combat. It's a tactical combat game, really, kind of dressed up with 4X mechanics. Now, the developer Proxy Studios then developed a new game called Zephon, and they actually put diplomacy back into the game. But it doesn't really work because it's still a very combat-focused game. So now in Zephon, you will have periods of time when nobody's at war with one another. But Zephon does not have the depth of gameplay in the economic side of things. It's very, very basic. Or any of the other gameplay to really sustain interest. It's a boring gameplay loop if nobody's fighting. It's terrible. So in order to do that, they kind of had to ad hoc this new victory condition in, and this kind of end game mechanic, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but this is a big problem for games. Now, it's arguable as to whether Zephon works or not. I'm still on the fence about it, but I'm just using this as an example of how mechanics can sometimes, they can be added and removed for better or worse. Okay, another problem with the 4X game structure when it's taken out of content is, we end up with this kind of perception of end game grind, and this is related to the overall problem of... So, we've got this idea in 4X games called snowballing. Okay, I'm just going to turn this music down a little bit. We've got this idea called snowballing, and what this means is that when you as a player in a competitive game have taken enough territory, bearing in mind that territory usually means more resources. Let's say you take 66% of the territory in the game. Usually around that kind of point, your resource income is such that you can build armies large enough that you can pretty easily dominate the game, because you start to be able to overwhelm people militarily. You've got better research. You can afford to give people bigger bribes in diplomacy, whatever. So snowballing is a bit of a problem if it's not thought about and baked into the game's design in some way. Emperor of the Fading Suns here has got a really nice way of... it's got many mechanics for kind of limiting snowballing, which we can talk about. But just for now, let's just say that snowballing can be a real problem in 4X, and it's one of those things where if the player gets to the point where he feels like he's won, but the game's not technically over because the victory condition's usually weak, then that's not very fun, because they feel like they kind of feel obliged to go mop up those last few planets, or they've got to chase down the enemy, and efforts to include arbitrary game-ending mechanics, like for example with Galciv 4, Stardock did their best to kind of give you these little goals that you can achieve that will increase your score to the point where you can win quite rapidly, but you need to be in a sort of game-winning position usually to be able to attempt them. That was an admirable attempt to try to fix this, and it's debatable as to whether it worked or not. Okay, but we've also got this perception of an end game grind as well, and this can often be to do with the amount of units. Now, this is one of this game's potential problems, which is you are often managing a lot of stuff, many cities. You're often managing many units if it's a war focused game, and you might have lots of leaders to deal with. You might have lots of content to do, and I think some players can get a bit overwhelmed with it towards the end, and particularly as these games grow. By the way, Emperor of the Fading Suns is not as bad as some people make out for the amount of stuff you've got to do, but this game potentially, if you played it like a classic 4X, where you are taking planet by planet and building massive amounts of units on each one, that could get very, very, lots of management very, very quickly, and some players do not like that. So there becomes this perception of what's called the slow end game, or the end game grind. I would argue that if the game is getting boring at the end, it's because it's a boring game and it's not very well designed. But yeah, we'll come back to that later. There's another issue with 4X, which is that diplomacy tends to become exploitable. So diplomacy in 4X games, I did a video on this, but basically it's there partly to give a friendly human-looking face to a stone-cold CPU. This guy, dealing with this guy, Cedric of House Hawkwood, feels better than just, facing a chess computer with a timer, right? And so that's partly why it's there. The other thing is it's there to exchange game resources and to set a game state. So whether you're at war, whether you're at peace, that kind of stuff. So there's a few, but the problem is that diplomacy tends to be exploitable. So for example, let's say Cedric here, he goes to war with me, but I see that he's got, he needs some technology or something. Well, I can say to him, all right, don't go to war with me now, I'm not ready. But when I'm, and so I just delay him from going to war by dumping him a load of money. I might just throw him a load of credits, I give him some technology that he wants or something, and then I can kind of pacify him just long enough for me to be able to finish my other war or build up the units, whatever I need to do. Usually sneak a load of units into position where the AI is not kind of aware that that's going to be in a tactically disadvantageous position for him, and then I alpha strike him and then he's dead. So diplomacy is very, very abusable in 4X games, and that's a big problem. And so, as I said with Gladius, diplomacy tends to be one of these mechanics that gets shoehorned into new games without any care as to how it actually affects the overall playability of the game. Which leads me on to the next point, which is that 4X design tropes and features are often tacked on just to tick the 4X box and satisfy 4X gamers who have come to expect them. Okay, so for example, when a game is released that doesn't have diplomacy, for example with Gladius, a whole lot of people would be like, no, it's not a 4X game. And some people actually just won't buy the game because of that. And so this effect can drive designers or publishers and developers to push in mechanics that aren't really thought, like they're not really well integrated into the rest of the game's design. I want to talk very quickly about the concept of tightness. This is a really tight game, okay? And what that means is that everything in here has been thought of for a reason. I'm going to use the League as an example, right? So we've got this faction in it called the League. These are the only way that you can buy and trade resources in the game, and there's a law reason for that. These are guys with the spaceships. Okay, they've got the ships and the infrastructure necessary to actually transport stuff around. So there's a law reason for these to exist. It's not just an arbitrary mechanic, and that's important. We'll come to it later. But the League, whenever you buy and sell resources with these guys, whenever you buy resources from them, their war chest increases. And what this does is they're a faction of their own. They've got their own agenda, and when they've got enough money, they will actually come out of their home of Leagueheim, and with loads of fleets, they'll declare war on everyone and they'll try to win the game. Well, that sounds like a crazy endgame crisis to me. The reason why that exists is not just to have more content. It's not there just to have more content. There's a bunch of clever reasons. One of the reasons is that the triggering of the Third Republic, which is what happens when the League gets that war chest up, that it basically is like a clock for the game, because once they start coming out, they will start attacking they'll attack players, they will start to try taking worlds, and it forces you to get a shift on and try to get the game finished. So that's one reason. It's kind of a natural clock, but it comes off at random times. It can come quite early or it can come late. Okay, so it's not like a predictable clock, but it's partly there to do that. The other reason is because this game's economy kind of breaks if you are able to freely trade resources between players. But you can't do that in this game. Like Cedric of House Hawkwood here and myself, we cannot trade resources. And the reason is because these designers were absolute geniuses, and they realized early on that scarcity of resources in 4X games is what drives most of the gameplay. If you don't have any scarcity and stuff can be freely traded around or infinitely generated, games get boring and people start complaining about the boring end game grind. Okay, so that is what I mean by this. This is an example of well-designed game where every single mechanic in it is not there just arbitrarily. It's there because it exists to serve the overall game's design. Okay, so the features are often tacked on just to tick boxes, and that's a big problem. The final point is another thing we can use Emperor of the Fading Suns to illustrate, which is that victory conditions in 4X games are often added as an afterthought, not as a core mechanic. Now, I might be guilty of mind-reading designers and developers here, but I can kind of see it, right? In fact, you know, because if you follow any video game development now, where often they're released into early access, they're half finished, the developers are very candid about what they're doing, you can tell that they switch victory conditions around. It's clear that the victory condition is not at the top of the pyramid with all the other mechanics cascading down from that, as it should be. Your victory condition absolutely must be the first thing that you're getting right, because if you do, then you're able to develop this tight, gameplay system where, like with Emperor of the Fading Suns, where they've thought of everything, where every single faction in the game exists because it does a specific job. Like these guys are here, right? The Orthodox, the church, they are there to stop players hoarding technology. So in 4X games, there's a problem where somebody gets too good at technology, like the Mentor in Master of Orion. They're too good at technology; they tend to be the strongest. Okay, and so they realise that in this game. So they've actually got this faction in the game now that will, if you've got technology that they don't like, and you can influence them by getting them to prescribe technology. You can be like, okay, my enemies are using Zil war beasts. I want you to prescribe that technology. And what happens is these guys will fly around with these spaceships full of space marines, and if they find that technology in your labs on your planet, they will burn your labs. And it's really, really bad. And they will hate you, and they've got votes as well. Okay, so everything in this game makes sense. Now, the victory condition on this game is really tight. It's just like in Master of Orion, the victory condition was pretty cool, right? Every player or every population on a planet gives you an amount of votes, and so by taking more territory, conquering more worlds, and growing your populations, you grow the amount of votes that you get, and then the vote is made every now and then. I forget how many turns, might be 20 turns. Every 20 turns that you've got to, you have to win the vote, and if you lose it, you lose the game. So this is an example of an anti-snowballing mechanic in Master of Orion, because if you grow too quickly and too powerfully, the AI players will realize that you're strong and they will work against you. Now, in practice, in the original Master of Orion, it didn't always work out like that, but that's the theory behind it. And in Remnants of the Precursors, very good remake, that it works like that. So you can't just snowball out of control super fast, because unless you're actually willing to win the game at that point, the AI will turn on you and you can actually lose the vote. So you've got to always be aware of it. This has got a similar system in a voting system. I'm not going to go into it. If you've if you want to, I did a video on Emperor of the Fading Suns, or a couple of videos, which explained just how genius the victory condition is. But suffice to say, the victory condition drives every other mechanic in the game. Okay, that's my point I want to make. All right. So we're continuing going down the problems of 4X design. The original games were also good that they're a tough act to follow. Okay, so this is Master of Magic, you know, Civilization, the first few Civ games, and Master of Orion. 4X as a genre was kind of an accident, or a halfway point between tabletop war games and modern grand strategy games. That halfway point shouldn't really exist anymore, but the fact it was so weird and interesting has kept it alive. I've made this point already. New games are always compared to those originals, okay? So because those original games were so good, new games that come out are often compared to them, particularly by existing, you know, the existing 4X community, which is a tough community to please. And so they're rarely, and the problem is that the new games are rarely as well designed, okay, because what they're doing is exactly what I've said. They are trying to capture the fire of Master of Magic or Master of Orion by getting those mechanics and just throwing them arbitrarily into this pot and stirring it up and throwing in some fancy new graphics and you know, maybe an expensive voice actor, and they're stirring this pot and then they're churning this stuff out. And actually it turns out that the games are just not as good as the originals, mostly, okay, not all the time. Sometimes we get some great games, I'm not denying it, but for the most part the vast majority of the games have some good ideas, but they sink under the weight of the old crap that they're trying to put in there that does not fit. Okay, another problem is that 4X games are kind of difficult to define. And so we get loads of different types of 4X games, okay? We get these kind of turn-based ones like this. Then we get real-time games like Distant Worlds or Stellaris. We get sandbox and simulation style games that they play very differently to more sort of curated games like this, which are very rules based. So for example, Shadow Empire is a game, it's a turn-based game, but it's very heavy on the detail. You've got games like Galactic Civilizations, the newer ones, which are very sandbox-like in that they give the player a whole lot of mechanics and then a very, very strong faction customization and very, very strong randomized content that really generate very many different game situations depending on how you, apparently on the roll of the dice or how you set them up. Sandbox games and something like Master of Orion or Emperor of the Fading Suns are completely different, and this further confuses developers, I think, because they're not always sure of which kind of game it's going to be. Some other examples might be something like Star Wars Rebellion or Star Wars Supremacy, which is, you know, yeah, again, it's a very rules-based game, you know, and we can compare that with something like Galciv. Distant Worlds is a very real-time, sandboxy, simulation-based game versus Master of Orion, which is more tight, more board game-like, more rules, you know, more about more simple rules. All of these have got very different design principles. Okay, next. So 4X games have often got other genres embedded into them, and this is most notable with combat systems, generally speaking. So we've often got playable tactical combat, whether it's turn-based or real-time, and you know, so you might have a game like Master of Orion, and Master of Magic, which has got like a grid-based tactical combat system that's been iterated on over and over again. Sometimes developers make them better, sometimes they make them worse, sometimes they're just a different flavour of what we've already had. Real-time battles are a big thing as well. Sword of the Stars is an example of that, with a good an interesting real-time combat system. So is Distant Worlds. Some games like Empire at War, for example, Star Wars Empire at War, they included real-time RTS battles as part of the gameplay. And I think Empire of War is a bit of a loose fit for the 4X genre, but still, it just goes to show that often developers would try different ideas, and this, you know, different players like different things, and again, this kind of makes 4X games a little bit difficult to define and develop. Okay, so I'm just going to list out another couple of the problems with 4X. I don't want to go too long on problems because I think a lot of you are going to be starting to get the idea. Devs tend to churn out rehashes of the same old games with different aesthetic choices and minor mechanical changes, but they don't usually care so much about the overall design and how tight it is. There are exceptions, but most of the Mu clones are worse than Master of Orion 1, for example, and few of them are even as good as Master of Orion 2, which I think is a flawed game. And new ideas in the subgenre tend to get swamped by the need to adhere to Master of Orion 1 without really understanding what made that game work. So what I mean by that is, I'm kind of further elaborating on this point I was making with Emperor of the Fading Suns, is that Master of Orion worked really, really well in context of the game that it was trying to be, okay? So it had, for example, it had espionage in there. Espionage is a mechanic that is often put into other 4X games that just does not work very well at all. The AI just generally can't use it, and it's just not that well done. But it's a box that needs to be ticked for most players if it's going to be a 4X game. So the way that Master of Orion's espionage worked was really easy. You just assigned a little bit of money to it every turn, and it gave you a dice roll. And the dice roll was like, you know, and you could set what you wanted the effect to be like. Do you want to steal technology? Do you want to destroy an enemy base? And it was really quite basic, but the AI was able to use it quite well because it was so basic, okay? And so this is just one example. Often designers are just putting these things in. Yeah, I'm kind of going over the same point. Master of Magic is a strong game, right? But Fantasy 4X has definitely evolved a little bit better than Space 4X has. So this is, when I'm saying that devs kind of churn out rehashes of the same old games with different aesthetic choices, I think that's much more of a problem with Space 4X games. I think Fantasy 4X games tend to be a little bit more creative, and I think I don't know, I'm just speculating here, and I'm not really thought this one through very heavily, but I've noticed Fantasy 4X games tend to iterate on the various tropes a little bit better than Space 4X games do, but I'm going to leave it to you guys to decide whether you agree with that or not. Civ clones, on the other hand, tend to suck, and the problem is Civ's popularity, well, the saving grace of historical 4X, right, is that every developer is trying to chase Civ's fire. It's very few developers make historical 4X because they're really, really hard to make well, and they're expensive. But Civ's popularity does force historical 4X games to evolve faster and harder, I think. So we've had some really good historical 4X games come out recently. For example, Old World is a really good game by Mohawk Games, Soren Johnson. Then we've got Imperium's Greek Wars, which is a very, very forward-thinking historical 4X game that's bordering on grand strategy and has very, you know, interesting. It's got a resource-based economy with scarcity built in, which is just absolutely critical for good 4X game design. Historical 4X in general is attractive for developers, I think because Civ gets such big audiences, but like I've said, it's kind of difficult to do. Alright, let's have a look at this. So there's a couple more problems I want to talk about really fast. The hardcore 4X community are a really, really tough crowd to please. They're jaded, they're bored of everything, they complain if stuff's the same, and they complain if it's different. They generally shoot down anything that's not familiar, and they'll shoot down anything that's not different enough. So this is a real bad problem. It's a perennial problem for 4X game developers. And you can talk to any developer, and they will even if they deny it, you know that they're in their back of their mind, they're kind of going, yeah, he's kind of right. And that is that it's so hard to please the community, and that's because for every single 4X game out there, there is a different kind of player. Okay, there are as many 4X game like fans and types of 4X game fans as there are examples of the genre. Some people like playing slow-paced sandbox games. Other people like playing, you know, very hardcore war-focused games that are very high on the pressure. Some people don't like pressure. Some people need clocks, you know, like timers to keep them focused. Other people hate them. You get the picture. It's just a big thing, and partly because the original games were so strong, and you know, memories of those old games are very, very strong as well. Sometimes stronger than the game's design, in fact. You'll find that the 4X community are really, really hard to get to agree on anything. And when games do come along that they do all like, that can be quite noticeable. And, you know, so for example, we've had fantastic success with Age of Wonders 4 in recent times. I'm not a huge fan, although I think it's pretty cool. But the 4X community mostly has got behind that one. I think there are critics and veterans of the genre that don't like it so much for various reasons, but I think most people will agree that it's doing a lot of things right, and it's certainly united, you know, it's brought new people into the 4X community, and there's no doubt about that. And Triumph and Paradox have got to be saluted for that, without doubt. They've had fantastic success, but that's rare. It's really hard to do. Just look at how Millennia and, you know, like for example, Millennia came out recently. The 4X community, some of them liked it, some of them didn't. It's a perfectly good game. The problem is the 4X community is just hard. It's a tough crowd to please. I'm going to give you one example of this. The Master of Magic remake by Mohawk Games was a passable attempt to remake an old classic. it looked nice and it had some decent aesthetics, but they broke the AI and they added hexes instead of tiles because presumably that newer is always better in most people's minds, and that clearly made the AI not be able to play the game. So I think that and one of the issues with that was that it was not different enough from the original game to please 50% of the people who wanted to play it, and it was too different for the other 50%. So it wasn't really a remaster, it wasn't quite a remake, it was somewhere between. I think Matrix and Slytherin really threw Muha an impossible mission with that without really meaning to, and Muha did their best. They made what they thought was a good game. It's not a bad game, but it just turned out not to be as good as the original from pretty much everybody. So that was a real shame, and this is what I mean. The 4X crowd, or the community, are really, really tough crowd to please. Getting new players into 4X is really difficult as well. The learning curve is quite steep. Newer gamers coming into the genre tend to expect tropes from other genres to be injected into 4X, or they kind of bitch and cry about it. So this is me being a little bit mean, but it's true, unfortunately. There's a real problem getting new players into the genre without making massive concessions to the way that the games work is really, really hard. And what we're starting to find is, and this is a different topic, I don't want to talk about this too much, but it is adjacent. It's one of these issues that I was warning you about at the start of the video, where it's an adjacent issue we need to think about, but we're not going to go into it too deeply. And that is that, yeah, because the learning curve is quite steep, and newer gamers have been trained on, I'm talking about people who are younger, they've not been playing games quite as long as some of the old school people like myself who've been playing these games since 1990 and before, some of us. So they're coming into it and they're finding the complexity too much, and often they'll be coming from other sort of adjacent strategy type genres, like things like tactics games, which are way simpler, and they've got much cleaner user interfaces because there's less information to present, and they're coming in and getting overwhelmed and going, oh, it's too hard, I can't understand it, make it easier. And so developers are kind of going, oh, well, we need to make the games easier now because new players are struggling. And that's really ruining 4X games design. This is an adjacent issue, but we're not going to talk about it too much now. Okay, so we've talked about the problems. I hope it's given you lots to think about. I'm sure there are many, many more problems with 4X games design and development, but I've just gone over the ones that came to mind. So what is the consequence of this? Well, most 4X games tend to fail spectacularly now, or they fall miserably short of expectations, whether that's by sales figures for publishers and developers, or whether it's in terms of the way that it's appreciated by fans. The best 4X games tend to do something different. This is really important. 4X developers tend to fall back on what I call band-aid development. So when their games aren't doing so well, because usually they've jammed in all these mechanics that don't fit, they've added diplomacy where it doesn't work. The diplomacy's boring because all it does is trade resources, but it doesn't actually have any bearing on the rest of the game, so the players can exploit it. What they tend to do is they start going, oh, there's a problem with diplomacy, I know, let's just add more diplomacy. So they add useless content to deflect from these deep structural flaws. This is a problem in games like Stellaris, for example. And I can hear the collective cries of outrage and the cursing of my name. But Stellaris, regardless of what you think about it, I think it's a fun game, okay? But that nobody, not even the most rabid, hardcore, die-hard fanboy, defender of Stellaris can ever claim with the hand on their heart that it is a game that they haven't just thrown more stuff at to try to fix. They're constantly adding more and more contents to the game to try to paper over the deep problems that Stellaris has. It's a bad 4X game, but if they add more stuff like, oh look, now leaders have got more, you've got more stuff that you can do with leaders, or let's add more detail into the economic situation, or we're going to give you a few more diplomatic options, or an extra endgame crisis. None of this stuff fixes the problems with Stellaris, but it does give more stuff for you to do. And they will periodically go through and just rip stuff out because they're like, oh well, it's not really working now, so let's try to. You can't do games design like this, okay? this kind of idea that you add more stuff to the game to make it, to fix things and make it better, it just does not work. And every now and again, that, you know, instead of adding an extra arm, you know, they send Stellaris into surgery. They're like, right, we need more arms, so they give him more arms. But then again, one of his kidneys is failing, so every now and again they have to sort of reluctantly go in and chop out a kidney, and they give it a triple heart bypass, and then half of the fan base hate it because they've changed the game dramatically. You get the idea. It's a losing battle. It's a money-making scheme for Paradox. They make loads of money off Stellaris, but in terms of tight games design, it just kind of gets worse and worse. And anybody who has tried to go back to Stellaris will, you know, like for example me, if I go back to Stellaris 2 years after playing, not only have I got to then catch up on 2 years of, like, you know, what is it, quarterly updates, and potentially buy a whole bunch of DLC in order to kind of get the, you know, to try to get these band-aid fixes. You're just lost every time you come back to the game. So unless it really only appeals to people who are constantly playing Stellaris, and Stellaris players tend to be those, like, you'll see it on the 4X Gaming subreddit, where people will come along like, can someone give me an idea of a 4X game to play like Stellaris? And it's often because they've come to Stellaris from other, you know, usually from Civ or something else, and they don't really know what 4X games are, so they think that Stellaris is all that there is, which is a shame because it's kind of a bad example of the genre. Okay, fixes. Okay, so yeah, so developers often try to they constantly change stuff around to try to fix individual issues. This often throws the rest of the game out. Now, of course, if your game was loose as shit in the first place, it doesn't really matter that much if you keep fixing things and changing things, right? So fixes for issues, whether they're real or perceived, with arbitrary feeling mechanics that are unconnected from the rest of the game's design, can feel really jarring. Okay, so you often get this when developers will realize that there's some kind of unbalanced crap that they've put into their game, and they'll just put some arbitrary limit, like, okay, players are just complaining about city spam. I know, we're just going to limit the, you know, now you only get to make 5 cities. Why? Oh, because reasons. And, you know, they don't, like, so for example, Emperor of the Fading Suns, yeah, they've come up with a lore-based reason, which is baked into the lore of the RPG system the game's based on, why there are not that many, you don't get that many ships at the start of the game. And it's these ships, these transport ships, which naturally limit your ability to snowball. Like, if you were able to build your own transports at the start of the game, you could rapidly, like, explode in size every turn. You'd have exponential growth, and the game would quickly become completely overwhelming within a matter of turns. So what they've done is they've strictly limited the amount of ships that you get. You can't even design these things until later in the game, loads later. And often the church will be prescribing the techs, so you're not even allowed to. You have to do it kind of sneakily, or you get your labs burned down. So this is a natural, lore-based and clever way of limiting, you know, limiting snowballing and limiting, you know, the ability for a player to dramatically outplay an AI, in a way that's not arbitrary, rather than just going, well, you know, you can only have 3 cities, because that sucks. Okay, the big consequences of this of the problems of 4X games design is that inevitably publishers, developers, they declare, well, you know, we spent all this money, we made this 4X game, and they say 4X games are dead, 4X don't sell, and they're not really understanding that the genre, the genre structure that they're building these games into, and the audience that play them are not strictly tied to one another. This is a crucial point I really want people to consider. You do not tie 4X games and the genre as a whole to the audience that's playing it, because if you develop a game that is interesting to those kinds of people who play those kinds of games, they're going to play it. They don't care whether you've made it as a 4X game or not. That's how people who are really tied to one genre will end up hopping to over games from different genres. We know this happens because we get loads of people coming into 4X from Stellaris going, hey, can anybody recommend a game that's like Stellaris? I'm bored of it now, but I don't know any other games. So we know that people hop genres, and, you know, new players find these new games. So this is an interesting thing, because I think it's sad, because I've seen it firsthand where developers are like, well, you know, our last 4X game didn't sell, so we're just not going to bother making them anymore. And it's like, okay, well, that's I understand why you've done that. It probably makes no financial sense for you to make a game that you're not making, that you're getting no financial remuneration for, or no remuneration. But I think that your game is going to be more successful if you make the game as a self-contained thing from the top downwards, and fuck genres. And this is going to take me into what I call BattleMode's proposed solution. So BattleMode's proposed solution is fuck genres. Pardon my French, but it's really important. Stop thinking about genres. Genres are not important and they hold you back in games design. Forget about it. Okay? People are addicted to this categorization shit, and we do need some form to artistic projects. But rigid structures kills creativity, and it encourages developers to add bloat just for the sake of it. Okay? Because they're like, well, you know, we've got to add diplomacy, we've got to add espionage, because if we haven't got espionage, people are going to think we're trying to sell it to them as a DLC later, and then they're not going to buy it, and then they're going to give us a negative Steam review. This is a big problem. So stop making 4X games, okay? Forget 4X. You will never make a game as good as Master of Orion, probably. That's a challenge, by the way. I'm not saying that to insult anybody. I'm sure you've got the creative talent in your teams to be able to do it, but you're not going to do it while you're trying to make Master of Orion. You're always going to be living in the shadow of that one damn game. And I'm not talking about just I'm not saying don't make Master of Orion clones. There have been loads of great Master of Orion clones that I think are wonderful games, like Interstellar Space Genesis is a great game. Stars in Shadow is another great game. There's a load of others that are decent games, right? But while you are trying to maneuver space in the 4X genre, trying to muscle your way in on that small territory, you've got to come up with something new, and your new game ideas are going to be strangled by trying to tick the boxes that, the boxes that say this is a 4X game, to people who are hungry for new 4X games and expect certain things from previous games, but without understanding the process of games design, and that you can't just throw crap into a design and expect it to work. Everything has to be made from the top downwards. So you need to frame your game in terms of what the player is doing, not like an arbitrary genre, okay? There's a real bad problem we got at the moment, I think, and it's partly to do with the way that Steam sort of sells and promotes games with its algorithms, but there's one reason why every goddamn game on Steam now has to have roguelike in the title, okay? And it's the reason why every goddamn game now seems to have crafting in it. And we can blame Dwarf Fortress for this ultimately, because Dwarf Fortress inspired Minecraft, and Minecraft was a game about crafting. Crafting, by the way, works perfectly in Dwarf Fortress. It's a wonderful mechanic, it's super fun to engage with, and in Minecraft it's built around crafting. It's a game about crafting. It works great. Minecraft's a great game, man. But when you transbank crafting out of Minecraft and you put it in Divinity Original Sin, a CRPG, God, that makes that game shit. And what about The Witcher 3? I got so sick of that. It was like a hoarding disorder simulator. Every time I was searching through loot or killing you kill an enemy and there's a corpse, to find anything usable you got to pick up all these trinkets. It's garbage. It's like hoarding disorder simulator. I hate it. So this isn't a perfect example of what I'm talking about, transplanted from another genre. The idea that in order for people to meet these genre expectations, they're having to add stuff from other games that just doesn't fit. And even worse in my opinion, as soon as marketing teams kind of figured out that if they add roguelike to the genre description, they were able to market it as a roguelike and instantly they get more sales, because that was a popular thing for a bit. I think you'll find that that's a double-edged sword now, and a lot of people are sick of roguelike, what I would call roguelite mechanics. Let's not even go into the roguelike ranks today. But so they're starting to exploit these things now, and that actually, here's the issue. Let's say we get a game like Vampire Survivors, and it's being marketed as a bullet hell, which is not at all, but I've seen people make claims like that. And then a big publisher comes along and goes to a developer, hey, we're going to throw you shitloads of money. We want you to make a bullet hell game. And so the bullet hell developer goes, oh, that's great. We've made loads of bullet hell games. We love Cave and all these kind of, I love Dodonpachi and Mushihime Sama and all these stuff. Oh, no. We want you to make Vampire Survivors. And they're like, you what? No, Vampire Survivors. A bullet hell, right? It would be like going to Tarn Adams or the guys who made Caves of Cud and going, hey, we want you to make a roguelike. And they're like, oh, great, that's what we do. And they'll be like, yeah. And then they make a game. It's like, well, this is nothing like Spelunky or FDL or Binding of Isaac. Like, what? You get the idea. So what I suggest is, fuck genres. Just aim your game to please 4X enthusiasts without rigid adherence to these 4X tropes. Build a game like this, where it kind of looks like a 4X game and it plays a bit like a 4X game, but it's really self-contained, totally self-contained, and everything in this game is there for a reason. It's just not there to tick boxes. Okay, so how do we propose, or how do I propose we go about this? Okay, I've talked about the problems and I've given you an overall solution, which is just stop thinking of games in terms of genres. It's a bad thing to do. It's ruining games, in my opinion. You've got to make every single game as a self-contained thing, and just try to if you want to make a game for a specific audience, find out what that audience wants and then build your game to try to please them. But don't, for God's sake, try to add stuff from previous games if it doesn't fit. I would suggest that we use board game style design for the overall macro level rules system, and then you use computer game style detail for all the rest of it, for the micro stuff, okay? Because I think board games have to be tight. They have to have counterbalancing rules. They've got to have mechanics that stop players from ruining the game in various ways by, using overpowered strategies, that kind of thing. So on the top, like this, again, this is a perfect example of this. We've got the Vow here, these guys here. They are here as a counterbalance. I'm not going to tell you what they do because it'll spoil the game. But like, for example, with the Church is there to stop technology becoming too powerful. The League there are a balancing mechanic to stop economic dominance, basically. People just, abusing the selling of resources because they've got a large empire. It's not supposed to be a classic 4X game in this. So they're there to balance that. You're the whole idea with the voting system. So every player's got these 5... every player's got 5 scepters which give you a vote for the victory, and so it stops coalitions from other players in multiplayer, because if 4 people gang up on one to go and take their scepters, well, somebody always gets 2 scepters. Do you see what I mean? This stuff's been thought about. They've really thought about it really carefully. So this is the sort of thing that board game type design really thinks about carefully. However, board games don't allow the kind of detail that a lot of players like when it comes to fine detail stuff. For example, this game's got a combat system where, you might have 30 units in a stack all fighting, and they might fight 30 rounds. You've got to roll all those dice in a board game. That gets boring pretty damn quick. So computer games, video games, they allow the computer, the CPU, to do the hard work of number crunching, which allows you to get loads more detail. So at the top level, I want you to make board game style design for the macro level stuff, for the core gameplay, okay? And then for your detail, for immersion stuff, for simulation, or to create tactical richness, then you want the computer game stuff. But unless you're unless you're a galaxy brain, and I'm afraid most of us are not, most designers are not good enough to be able to use super complex computer game detail level design from top to bottom. And it's clear when I play other games, new 4X games particularly, that they're not always locking down the tight macro level gameplay first. They're not thinking of the diplomacy of the victory condition first. Okay, now by the way, computer games can handle detail that you can't realistically manage in board games, but simulation and sandbox games kind of different. So like a game like Distant Worlds, for example, I think that there's some argument to suggest that simulation based stuff in the computer game style of the game design needs to be more prominent in that kind of thing. But still, I think even on, again, on the top down level, things like basic stuff, victory conditions, got to be strong. The ways that the players interact with other players have to be quite defined. I don't think you want to leave that stuff to simulation. So every system and mechanic in the game must support the overall design, and at all points, and you really want a strong and preferably single victory condition. Okay, multiple victory conditions in 4X games are really hard to do, and Civ kind of manages it. The older ones do. I'm not sure about the newer ones because I just don't really play them. I think they're bad games. But at least in the early Civ games, you had this sort of trajectory towards the various victory conditions, and it was possible for the AI to be able to play that kind of game. But generally speaking, you want a tight victory condition, and you need to anticipate ways that the players can cheese it. Okay, we also need high density of gameplay. So the gameplay loop, the main loop, needs to be satisfying. We don't want players waiting around for the good bits. So what we don't want is a slow start. Like, oh, we need to have the player just starting with a couple of units at the start and slowly building their empire up. Okay, that is okay for a certain kind of gamer, but you need options to be able to bypass that. Distant Worlds 2 does this nicely. If you want to start right at the start and research everything from scratch, you can. But for players who need more gameplay faster, you need to ensure that those players get into the game. They don't have the friction of waiting, okay? Because that's friction. That stops people liking your games. Add extra features only when necessary, whether that's to add extra pressure, to prevent or facilitate snowballing, as a check against some of the kind of power the player has access to. But these need to be woven into your core design. Do it at the design level. For God's sake, don't release your game, then realise it's got a critical problem and then try and fix it afterwards. That's going to break the game. If you're adding something simply because players expect it, it probably needs to go. Okay, you need to work that kind of thing into the game in a different way so it properly feeds into the overall thrust of the game's design. What I mean by this is, like, if diplomacy doesn't fit in your game, but there's some other way of getting immersion, for example, say it's the immersion part of the diplomacy that you're trying to get, then you find another way that satisfies that need the players have for that particular thing, without just banging in diplomacy without, you know, thinking about it. Like the classic 4X diplomacy, I'll give you 10 gold for the technology, and, you know, then I'll trade it around to everybody else in the single turn. That stuff's just not going to work in a lot of games. Okay, alright, stop putting fucking crafting in everything. Okay, I don't mean this literally, but read between the lines. Adding mechanics to tick boxes has got to go. If you can't do that, you're going to make a shit game. Okay, so don't just add stuff for the sake of it. Which this is going to lead into the fact that we need to prioritize the quality and your tightness of gameplay over sales in your initial game. Okay, and I have big arguments with people, especially people in the industry, about this. And the argument is that, well, you know, if my game doesn't sell, then I can't. You know, there's no point in me doing it because I've got investors to please, blah blah blah. Yeah, sure, but if you're adding mechanics in order to sell more games, that often runs counter to what makes a good tight game. I'm going to implore you, please spend a little bit more time in the development process and add, you know, if you need to add mechanics that are going to help sell the game, get people in, that's bad in my opinion, but if you feel you've got to do it, try to tie it into the core design of the game in a more seamless and less noticeable way. You've got to stop caring about selling games as a priority. You've got to prioritize making the game good, because if your game is good, it will sell. Okay, if your game is good, it will sell. So this is probably going to mean more time in development, more time in the design process. You got to give your designers more time to cook. Okay, because rushing games out, you know, try and then going, oh no, we need to do this to please this group, we got to do this, that's just going to make a bad game. Okay, and we see it all the time. The occasional bad game can sell. Look at Vampire Survivors as a perfect example. Really bad game in my opinion, but it's sold like hotcakes. But that's because they filled it full of gambling industry mechanics, and I just think it's really, really bad. I don't think it's good. And a game can sell more if you design it to sell well, but it likely won't be a great game, and Vampire Survivors is a great example. Saying your game's a roguelike doesn't make it one either. That's another point I want to make. So the few sales you get by ticking the roguelike box is not worth the loss you get from watering your game down to achieve that. Okay, so yeah, adding crafting, like if this game added crafting, can you imagine? Like, why would you do that? The 3 people that you might get buying the game extra because you've got crafting in it will not make up for the fact that you'll lose you know, this game will no longer be played in 20 years. Hey, let me give you a point, right? People are still playing Master of Orion 1 now. Not many, but there are still people playing, and there's quite a lot of people play Remnants of the Precursors, which is basically the same game. Still people playing Master of Magic. You know, Slytherin thought it was a good bet to make a remake of Master of Magic because it's that loved a game. And that's what, 30 years old now? You guys tell me, especially Vampire Survivor fans, tell me with your hands on your heart, is anyone going to be playing Vampire Survivors in even 5 years' time? 5 years? Maybe 2? Or is that game going to be dead in like 9 months? Once people realise there's absolutely no skill to it whatsoever and it is purely just boring RPG meta progression passed off as an arcade game, nobody's going to be playing that game in 20 years' time. Nobody. So just because a game sells well doesn't make it mean it's a good game. Now, if you're a publisher and all you care about is making money, then go ahead, make Vampire Survivors 4X, whatever. But I'm not going to play that game. I think that's going to suck. I'm not going to waste my time with it. But if you're dead lucky, you might end up with something like Shadow Empire, which by, you know, the size and complexity of it shouldn't ever have sold any copies whatsoever. And it's done incredibly well. It's done incredibly well. I mean, that's like Aurora 4X suddenly becoming a smash hit. Imagine that. Okay. Really, really quickly, because I want to finish this now. What does a well-designed 4X game look like? We've talked about most of this stuff, so I'm going to go through this really quickly. A strong victory condition that leads all other gameplay. Avoid multiple victory conditions unless you can ensure they're all tied into the same gameplay loop for all players and the AI can distinguish between them. Everything else cascades down from the victory condition. So if you get a strong victory condition, you build everything around it. You build your economy around it. You build your resource shortages around it. You build the way that players interact with other players and the environment around this victory condition. If the mechanic doesn't serve some way of the player achieving victory or having fun along that way, get rid of it. The gameplay loop's got to be fun from start to finish. So this whole fabled endgame problem with 4X games, no, you just got a boring 4X game, in my opinion. You just got a boring 4X game. Victory needs to come when the time is right. Everything else in the game must be designed to reach this point properly. Board games do this really, really well. Why can't 4X? Pacing needs to be consistent. 4X games tend to start simple and get more complex, but the density of fun must remain consistent throughout. Excessive tactical combat times and intensity can be fatiguing and cause players to turn the game off. Age of Wonders is really bad for this. So yeah, I mean, I'll give you two examples of a game. One that does it badly, one that does it well. Age of Wonders 4 is really bad for this. Excessive tactical combat length. It really punishes players for making mistakes in a big way. So you're kind of encouraged to play every single battle, even the really dreadfully boring ones at the start of the game. And it encourages players to just auto-resolve. So you're bypassing a half of the game's design by, instantly. It's just a bad design, in my opinion. Fallen Enchantress Legendary Heroes, this is a much better system because the tactical combat's fast. Another example of a game with really, really good tactical combat in the Fantasy 4X genre would be Eodor Genesis. Super fast tactical combat, really deep, excellent mechanics. The gameplay, it serves into the gameplay loop. Whenever I've finished a battle in Age of Wonders 4, I want to turn the game off because I'm done. Because the battles can be fun, but I can't be bothered to do any more of them because they're too long and boring. Whereas with Fallen Enchantress or with Eodor, I want to play the strategic side of the game to generate more battles because because they're perfectly paced. So just understand pacing. It's got to be consistent. Manage snowballing. Preferably you want to avoid snowballing completely. Like this game, snowballing's really hard in this game, and it doesn't size of the empire size of your resources and your empire is not directly correlated to your chances of winning the game. You can have all the planets, so many planets in this game with big armies, but if you make one mistake on Byzantium 2, you can lose the game. You can lose the vote because everyone's scared of you. You're too big. All right, well, we'll just vote against him then and someone else wins. It's not that simple, but you get the idea. So ideally, you want to avoid snowballing completely. If you can't, then you limit it in a non-arbitrary fashion through smart and fluff-friendly mechanics. For example, You have this idea, these once you get too strong, something else can come and invade you, or the other players have ways, non-gamey ways, to kind of limit the power of a very strong player without just relying on coalitions. So now we're going into the more speculative stuff, so I'm going to go through this quickly. I propose that we think economics first, okay? A resource economy that creates strict scarcity and drives all player interactions as they chase victory. Trade systems, diplomacy and war are all a function of this economy. Consider ditching diplomacy if your game can't support it properly. We need to avoid number wang games design. What do I mean by number wang? Numbers go up. Numbers go up is boring gameplay, in my opinion. It's lazy as well. Go on YouTube and type in number wang. It was an old Mitchell and Webb sketch, UK comedy. It's very, very funny, but if your IQ's over room temperature, you'll understand exactly what I mean by this and why it's a problem in a lot of games. Paradox games are really bad for number one games design, as are the new Total War games. Age of Wonders is bad for it, I think. It's often just different, combat particularly is often just some kind of variation of different damage types. Enemies being, units in these games are often big hit point sponges. It's kind of fine in simulation style games, but it needs to be secondary and subservient to a game's core principle style of play, in my opinion. It's really bad in combat. So like Age of Wonders is kind of boring for this because, like I said, the early games are kind of boring, or the early battles are kind of boring because they've just made everything super spongy. Nothing's very lethal. The mechanics don't really have very much in the way of hard counters. I like high lethality in combat personally. So I would recommend a crunchy combat system with high lethality and the potential for very fun, overpowered stuff to make the player feel powerful. And don't worry about balance, because balance sucks in single player games. The way that you balance these games is to make so many overpowered things that, like everybody's got something overpowered. This is how Dominions works, this is how Conquest of Elysium works. These games all are a little bit wonky, but they are way more fun than games that are super concerned about multiplayer style balancing. So avoid number one games design. It's a cancer on games design, man. I hate it. We want clear and satisfying power scaling. So if you're fighting most of your game with Nerf guns, but if you're like for the half of your 4X game, for 4 hours, you're just fighting with basic spearmen, and the very basic crappy magic, it's boring. It gets boring really fast. I want sugar. Give me sugar, okay? And what I mean by sugar is I want fun tools to play with right from the start of the game. Dominions doesn't make this mistake. It immediately gives you tons of tools with which to play the game. You get so much tactical complexity from the units that you get access to, and that's before you even start researching anything. So stop giving me basic spearmen. I want multiple different unit types. Age of Wonders is okay on this, but it could be better. Okay, and yeah, we want clear and satisfying power scaling. So what I mean by satisfying is that the player feels powerful as they gain these new tools. Okay, 4X games are empire building games. Now, Emperor of the Fading Sun's interesting because it starts you off with a lot of powerful stuff, but you don't get lots of it. So you get ships, which are really rare, and you might get a few of these very strong units. I'm not sure where they'll be on this game, but you get some very strong units, but you don't get many of them. They're a limited resource, and it teases you with how good they are. But later on, as you advance through this big, fairly big tech tree that doesn't really tell you much of what it all does, you'll start to unlock some of these more advanced units, and they're very satisfying to use when you do. That's what I mean. You don't necessarily have to lock everything. I don't want everyone starting with basic spearmen and then working up to nuclear weapons. I think there's more interesting ways of doing that now. Okay, we want to balance overpowered feeling mechanics with other overpowered mechanics. Yeah, we talked about this. Instead of nerfing everything in a sad and unsatisfying way. And this helps to sell the fantasy of the empire building, okay? Or the fantasy, you're this great fantasy warrior with these magic powers, or you're commanding these armadas of ships, whatever it is. It needs to be, we want immersion through gameplay, not just surface level aesthetics and reams of text, right? So the story, you can read text in this game. There's loads of text to be read if you want it, and as there is in Dominions. But there's nothing more compelling and immersive than interesting gameplay interactions. That's way more compelling than reams of text. Okay, reams of text can be nice if it's subservient to the rest of the game, and in this case it's actually built into the game's design. But you know, most games often have these kind of like data banks with loads of crap you got to read. That worked okay in Alpha Centauri, Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, because it did it really well and it was core to the experience of the game. Pretty much every game that came afterwards that tried to copy that, like, you know, the pathetic attempt that Civilization Beyond Earth did to try and replicate that, transplanting that idea into that game, just did not work, man. So the game's got to sell the fantasy, but it's got to be immersive, but the immersion really wants to come through gameplay, the interaction of interesting mechanics. Your fancy graphics, cinematics, and your expensive voice actor do not impress me whatsoever. You know nothing, Jon Snow. We need to avoid RTS-style balance like the plague unless your game has some other incredibly fun way of making players feel powerful. This is related to the selling the fantasy into the balance thing. You can achieve game balance through making everything overpowered, basically. Don't put guardrails on everything, that sucks. It's not fun. Single player games suck if everything feels nerfed, okay? And yeah, we want to avoid roguelite style meta progression in strategy games. This is going to be contentious, but I don't like it. I think it encourages the designers to make their games less full of stuff until later. This is a cheap and very cynical way to keep players playing longer. Again, I'll point to Age of Wonders. I don't like the Pantheon system in it, really. I think it's a bit cheap. Some people love it. That's fine. If you do, then there you go. But roguelite style, and I say roguelite, not roguelike. This has nothing to do with the classic roguelikes. Classic roguelikes do not have meta progression at all. That's just some crap that's come in later with the misuse of the term. Games need to be unique from start to finish, and I mean, you know, every time I start a game of Civilization, I want that game to be unique. I don't want to get access to stuff that was unlocked halfway through the game. It encourages lazy games design. That's why I don't like it. If somebody can come up with a way of doing meta progression that doesn't encourage lazy games design, go right ahead. But you know, for most of you, just ignore it. It's a bad idea. And we need to avoid gambling industry stuff as well. Like, so, you know, over-reliance on random rewards, things like that. I think it's kind of sinister. But, you know, it's not a hill I'm going to die on, but after reading, you know, after figuring out how the Vampire Survivor works, it really annoyed me. Okay, avoid campaigns as well. This is not RTS. It's closer to a classic roguelike in that respect. You know, a game in a 4X game wants to be complete and unique from start to finish, but we need to leave enough content and gameplay variation so that each game can be played over and over and over and over again repeatedly. But campaigns don't work in these kind of games, I don't think. So don't waste time trying. There's two quick points and I'm going to finish. One, this is a point that I was listening to a friend of mine make, and this is Mark from the Electric Underground. It was in his review of the remake of Ninja Gaiden Black. So yeah, the Ninja Gaiden 2 Black game that came out recently. He was talking about how difficulty is content. The idea that difficulty is content. And what this means is the way I've interpreted this is that we've got to start looking at game difficulty, and particularly games that have lots of ways for players to challenge themselves, as important as any other content or mechanic. It's not something that we need to be arguing over or tacking on, or, you know, this idea that everything's got to be easy for new players, or that it's somehow, you know, that disabled players or the disabled gamers are somehow disadvantaged if something's too difficult. It's all crap. It's all nonsense. We've got to stop making games that are designed for new players at the core level, at the expense of players with legacy skill. It's a plague. It's infecting all game genres at the moment. And part of the reason is they're doing it is because of the Steam refund window. That's part of the reason. They have to nurse players through the Steam refund window by making games easy and filling it full of garbage content like extended tutorials, huge long cutscenes in games, basically watering down the game's content. I want tight, high gameplay density, and difficulty is content. Okay, so I want difficult games. Make games that are challenging, because challenging games people can get their teeth into. And if you're smart, you'll also come up with ways for players to learn those difficult games. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go and look at Shadow Empire. This is a perfect example of a potentially incredibly complex game that eases the player in really, really genius fashion through the careful use of semi-automated mechanics that new players can mostly ignore on lower difficulty settings, but that actually become ways for advanced players to interact with very fine detail levels of the simulation to be competitive at higher levels. It's super clever, but Vic Rikers is a galaxy brain games designer, and I can't expect everyone to be like that. But go and look at that game for how it onboards people. Sure, I'm going to get loads of people going, I found Shadow Empire impossible to learn. It's like, yeah, because you probably didn't try. It's really it's really not that difficult to learn. So stop making games that are easy. Stop putting mechanics into games that are designed for new players, because especially if they ruin the experience for legacy players, that's really, really, really bad in my opinion. If a game is good, players will try and get better at it. Just trust me on this. If a game is good, if it's difficult but it's engaging and it's fun, if the gameplay loop is fun, they're gonna keep playing it. But on the contrary, we want no unnecessary friction. So avoid wasting players' time making them jump through hoops like excessive faction customization, huge chunk tutorials, other energy sapping things like that, like excessively long tactical combat, meta progression garbage, all that stuff. Just don't waste people's time. Respect your gamers' time, make your core loop interesting, exciting, give them something challenging right from the start. I don't want to play a game for half an hour and be bored, because I'm going to turn it off and play something better. I want the challenge and the interest to start immediately. Alright guys, that is it. That's my rant on do not make 4X games. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found that interesting, and I really I played it up because I partly feel strongly about these things, but also because I know that a lot of people, they've got these kind of intuitive feeling that something's not right with the genre and there's something that's just not working, but they're not always able to enunciate it. I've been like that for years, and I'm starting to get my my head around this topic now, and I really need your help, because I want you to let me know where I'm wrong. Okay, if I made a glaring error, if I'm not thinking something through, please let me know, because I'm not married to these opinions. Okay, this is just an opinion, and it's just it's a semi-educated opinion. I want you to come up with your examples, with your counter examples. Show me some games that have worked, that are really good, that don't apply the principles that I've talked about. Or if you think this is a good idea, if you like the ideas that I've come up with, I want you to show me some examples of games where you think this has really, worked. But I'm really trying. I don't care about, my opinions at all, really. My ego's like high. I've got a big ego, but I'm willing to drop it if we can make the games better. That's all I want. I want the games to be better, and consequently, I think if the games get better, we can encourage developers to start investing in them again, because they're going to attract more people, and not just casual gamers who pick up the game for and go, oh, it's too hard, can't understand it, complain, get the game changed, and then they don't ever bother playing it anyway. Like, we need less of those guys, in my opinion, and we need more people who kind of go, oh, that was hard, but actually I really like it, like I want to get better at it. And then they think about the game, and then they come and they contribute their own ideas to what will make a good 4X game. This is a living, breathing community, guys, and we've got to make the best of it. And you know what? Because it's a relatively small community, we've got unparalleled reach into the industry. You have no idea. Honestly, I work in the industry, and I tell you, people do listen. The developers and publishers do listen to what we say. They even put up with hacks like me, with my, boneheaded opinions. Because actually, some bonehead like me will come along and in the 99% of stuff that they're saying that they don't agree with, I might make, there might be a glint of gold in there. So it's really worth us talking about this, and I encourage you all to leave a comment and tell me what you think, and spread the video. And if you've come to this channel and you've never, you're not subscribed, you've never listened to me before, please please subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it. It's I want to make this a cool community. I want it to make it a big community that's got loads of reach. Yeah, we want more power. Give me power. Lend me your energy. I'm like Goku, and I'm asking you for the Genki Dama, you know, the Spirit Ball. Give me some of your energy, and we're gonna make this thing take off in a big way. What an image. Thanks, guys. I'll catch you next time. Take care.